Hi, my friends. Today we are having a conversation on those not so popular emotions like anger, depression, anxiety. So I have with me today, who is an expert on this, Bronwyn Scweigerdt, and she deals with many disorders, including anxiety and depression, as well as addressing relationship issues. And glad to have you, Bronwyn. Glad to see you here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah, so I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in California. Um, but I have a fun story of how I came to be that and how I came to specialize in anger. Um,
Good, let's hear it.
it's actually, yeah, it's actually a second career for me. I didn't go looking to become a therapist at all. And I didn't really want to change anything in my life, actually, as a lot of us don't. But about 15 years ago, close to 16 now, my husband and I were really affected by the Great Recession. And so we had to uproot and move about an hour and a half away from our home. But to me, it was like I might as well have been on another planet because I was just very deeply impacted. I was so alone. I'd lost my community, I'd lost my job. Um, and my daughter was just school age, so I just put her in school. My husband's going off to work every day, and I'm like alone, and I don't know a single person. And I fell into depression so profound. I was like, "What's happening to me?" I didn't even know I was. I mean, I knew I was depressed, but part of my one of my symptoms, which I've only heard of once from anyone else ever so far, is I was involuntarily vomiting at random times. So I would be driving my car down the freeway and I'd just vomit and I couldn't pull over. I literally would do that walking down the street. It was so humiliating and I couldn't control it. And that was a symptom of my how profound my depression was. So um everyone in my life who knew me said you need to go to a therapist. So I sought out multiple therapists, and every time I found myself sitting there and thinking to myself, I am hardly functioning at this juncture in my life. And yet, I'm pretty sure I would make a much better therapist than this person who's trying to help me. And I couldn't find anyone who really seemed to know how to attune to me, like how to understand me, how to validate me, how to have a conceptual framework for what's happening, which I knew existed, but I needed someone else to mirror back to me and help me make sense of. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I ended up part of my healing journey from that first depressive episode was going back to grad school, getting a second master's, this time in counseling psychology, and then getting my licensure. But yeah, and looking back in retrospect, I see that that was the first of three pretty big depressive episodes over about 10 years. And I see that every one of them was absolutely the result of suppressed anger. And I really believe that when we disassociate from our anger, um, it doesn't go away. It is invisible, but it's more real than this laptop that we're talking on. Like it is so real. And it doesn't just dissipate into the ether. It stagnates in our bodies
Yes.
and it causes either depression or anxiety. Some people it even causes mania, some people even psychosis. And I see that as a therapist. And so my goal is to help people know, your depression is, as Freud said at first, he said depression is anger turned inward. And he was so right. And
Yes.
anxiety is anger turned inward. And panic
Yes.
attacks are anger turned in. They're all suppressed anger. And so that's kind of my mission in life now. That's why I have my own podcast, is to get this out to people who aren't just
Yes.
my clients as a
Mhm.
therapist, but to the rest of the world.
So at this juncture, I'm going to jump in because
Yeah.
I suffer from chronic depression and panic disorder. And I never knew it when I was younger. I self-medicated with alcohol.
Yeah.
Because of that, and I made a lot of wrong decisions with men,
Sure.
mostly.
Yeah.
And because I picked the familiar. My household growing up was horrible, and I picked
Mm.
horrible.
Yeah.
So I self-medicated for about 20 years with
Mm.
alcohol. And
Sure.
I reached such a depression
Yeah.
that I didn't want to die, but in the morning when I'd wake up, I didn't necessarily want to live. And
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. That's what
yeah,
depression exactly feels like. You're
yeah,
right.
right. And I went to there, so I went to an addiction facility and got sober. And first, of course, had to detox me because there's no way they were going to be able to talk to me in the state I was in. And that took a few days. Plus, I had to be medically detoxed because by this time I had added pills.
Mm.
And really, I should have died, but I didn't. So I definitely get the subject. And as far as therapists and finding the right one,
Mm.
that took a very long time too, even after I got sober. So why do you think that most, I think you already said, why do most types of therapies and medication not work for depression and anxiety, in your opinion?
Yeah, yeah. So let me first let's talk about the medication. So what you were doing, Mimi, was dissociating even more. So I would say, depression, anxiety, panic, those are ways we're dissociating from the primary root problem, which is suppressed anger, or really from betrayal. It's really from people who we have very high expectations of. It's not from some stranger who cuts us off on the freeway. That doesn't make us depressed. That makes us angry in the minute. But it's betrayal. And so you were just so the depression, the anxiety in itself is a way to dissociate from that anger because we're choosing, or we don't even have awareness of what the primary problem is. So we're already dissociating from the anger. And now you're using substances, which so many people do, to
Oh,
dissociate from that even further, right? And I would say you can use those substances or you can use pharmaceutical substances. They're just ways to dissociate more from the root problem. I'm not
no,
saying that
and
pharmaceuticals,
yeah, and you numb
yeah,
yourself actually from
yeah,
you're not feeling your feelings, but you need to feel your
you're
feelings.
running away.
Yeah,
And I'm
and
not saying that pharmaceuticals can't have their time and place because they do.
oh, yes.
But if that's all you're doing and you're not getting to the root problem, that is not beneficial. And often they don't help in the long term. I tried so many different meds and anyway, and they do have a lot of side effects, all that. But let's just stop dissociating. Let's just go right to the
Right
problem.
to the problem. And I
Yeah.
definitely found out once I got sober and once I did 9 years straight therapy. Some of it was even inpatient, sober, but inpatient because I turned to other addictions.
Yeah.
Because sometimes when you put down one and like you said, don't look at that core and what's causing
Mhm.
it, I picked up
Yes.
food. So I had to go for a food addiction, food disorder.
Sure. Yeah.
And what I finally found out after 3 inpatient stints and lots of counseling is my parents were the core root
Oh, I could
because
have told you that on day one, but okay. Yeah.
yeah, I was just going to say because I did not really feel safe with my parents, which I should have, but I didn't
Yeah.
because all of the actions they took and the ways they treated us and each other, it was not a safe, loving household.
That's right. So I'm really glad you said that. So that usually is the issue. And that's really, again, why I'm having my own podcast. I don't want people to have to spend years because just like you asked me about why a lot of therapy doesn't work. There's so many therapists, just like you experience firsthand, Mimi, where all they're doing is managing the symptom. So,
Mhm.
well, Mimi, let's talk about like eating small, frequent meals throughout the day. And like they're managing the symptom of, which is not helping the root problem. And that is unfortunately what so much therapy does. It just manages symptom. If someone comes to me for a panic attack or a panic disorder, and all I'm doing is managing, like, okay, well, let's try breathing. Let's try, exposing ourselves to the thing that makes you panic. That's managing a symptom. Let's go to the root. The root is betrayal, suppressed feelings of anger from betrayal, from
Mhm.
usually it's an attachment figure, so it's usually the parent
Oh, yeah,
and
because
or
they're
one or
your
both.
first source. That's your first you relationship. You are born into this world. This is your first relationship. And I will tell you
Yeah.
this short little story. My mother was very cold and detached. I do not remember her kissing or hugging me at all, or any of us.
Yeah.
And when she was dying, I gave her a journal and I said, write some stuff about your childhood and things so I have when you leave.
Mm.
And when she left, I got the journal. Now she knew this was coming to me. I gave it to her. I told her I was going to get it after her death. And on the page where it said, how did you feel when you found out you were pregnant with me? She wrote, well, we didn't have a lot of money, so I tried jumping off the steps a couple times and I took mustard baths, but it didn't work. Now, this woman told
Wow.
me, knowing I'm going to read this in a book, that she tried to abort me and that
Yeah.
she did not want me. And I bring that up because there's scientific proof right now that the fetus feels the feelings of the mother. So
Hmm.
if the mother is angry or stressed, the fetus gets it. You know,
Well,
I
if the
think,
mother's normal angry and stressed like at other things, but if the mother's like angry at the fetus and like stressed
yes,
because of the fetus, I think that absolutely is going to impact that
yes,
attachment bond. And just like you're saying, so that attachment, what that did, having a cold mother who is, she's just sounds kind of like a hater, honestly, like a cold hater. And to write that for you to see, that's hatred. And a lot of unfortunately, parents have what I would diagnose as borderline personality disorder. Like it's so, so, so common. I would say almost like,
and she did too. And
yeah.
I write about that a lot in the book about
Mhm.
my early childhood and the alcoholism from my father and the non-affection from my mother and different
Yeah,
things, the whole
yeah.
household thing. But yeah, I did research on that, and that's a shame. It's and then when I bring her things to the nursing home and nice things to help her be comfortable. And the one day she said to me, "Why are you being so nice to me?"
Yep. Well, yeah.
And I said to her, because you're my mother. I mean, the question threw me for a loop. Like, even if she was the
Yeah.
worst mother in the world, I still believe that mother, you should love your parents, because
Yes.
that's ingrained in the Catholic Church that I went to.
Well, it's human, I think, ingrained in all of us on an intuitive level, regardless. But so to me, her asking that question just reinforces that she has very severe borderline personality disorder because people with borderline, and again, I think almost every single one of my clients had at least one parent with borderline. So it is both my parents had borderline in retrospect. Um, they don't trust. That's like, that trust versus mistrust. If you look at the like stages of development, Erickson, that first year and a half of life, that is where that foundation gets laid. And someone with borderline really doesn't trust anyone, and they especially don't trust their own children. And I'll tell you why. And this is all very Freudian, but they project their own experience of their mother, and it's all unconscious, that they hated because their mother was cold and detached or evil, wicked in some way. They project that on their children, so they don't trust the child. They often the parent will, let's talk about your mother. She'll be threatened by the child's happiness, she'll be threatened by the child's success, so she'll try to sabotage it, a lot of times with just these little quips like, let's say you say, hey mom, I got this new promotion at work, I'm so excited, and the mom will say, well, how are you gonna like do this and this and this and have that? They just
Yeah.
always want to like bring us down. and
Yes.
and the child, if you don't realize, if you don't have a framework going, oh my god, my parent is objectively sick in the head and
Mhm.
objectively threatened by my happiness and success, if we don't know that, we keep thinking, oh, it's all in my head, what's wrong with me, I'm shameful, I'm unlovable. And then what we do is we feel not only anger, but actually hatred. We can't help but feel hatred at someone like that. And then we feel ashamed for feeling that because we judge those feelings and we think that's a reflection of me. And what I tell my clients is no, that hatred is a normal human response to someone who is acting evilly in an evil way or wicked that
Mhm.
you depend on and that you want to love. And
Yes.
that's not a reflection of you, that's a reflection of them.
I always felt that too. I always felt she was jealous of me.
She was.
My father like adored me, and
Yeah.
but he was sick too. He had his
Yeah.
alcoholism and he had his own demons. And when I was 5 and getting ready to go to kindergarten and very excited, my brother Joe was 4, and the third sibling was being born. And my parents, the story goes, had no one to take care of us. And they put us in an orphanage for a week. Now picture a 5 and a 4-year-old being taken to this orphanage and said, "No, I'll be back."
While your mother
Wow.
was having her baby for that purpose.
Supposedly they had no one to take care of us.
Now, did she just tell you that or did that really happen?
Oh, it really happened. Oh, I have,
Oh.
yes. Oh, it really happened. And my dad came to
Mhm.
visit us, and for the 5 days or whatever we were there. And later on in life, when I brought it up, like I was a teenager and we were arguing about something, and I said, "I can't believe you did that to us." And they made it seem like it's no big thing. It was only 5 days. So yeah, they admitted it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But my brother and I were traumatized, of course.
Yeah.
But again, I felt unsafe. I could not trust my parents. I could not trust that they might not dump me on the corner someday.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And so if a child, um, that is, very active borderline behavior. So that is, she was jealous of you and she was threatened by you, probably especially that your dad adored you. But a lot of borderlines, they will so they go all good, all bad. So that's like classic borderline where they idealize the person. It could be the child. A lot of borderline mothers will idealize the child the first year because it makes her feel needed and wanted, and it's a mini me, and so she'll idealize her mini me. But then when that child gets around age 10, especially like when they enter that stage that we in therapy say is the beginning of differentiation, where that 10-year-old starting to identify more with her peers, she's starting to care more about going out with her friends, she's starting to care what she looks like. She's starting to, become more independent. She's starting to roll her eyes with the parents, which is totally normal. It's not easy as a parent to have a kid do that, but it's your job to remember I'm the adult and they're the child. And their job during that time is to actually kind of reject the parent. And our job as a parent is to not reject them back. Our job is to go, okay, this is a normal stage of development they need to go through, and I can have parameters around it, but I also need to let them go through it to some extent too. And I can take the hit because I'm the adult. But a borderline parent won't do that. And so some of my clients, I had this experience with my dad where I was pretty much idealized until I was that age by him. My mom was like yours, where she never, seemed to really show love or affection. But by him at age 10, all of a sudden I went from all good to all bad. And I never understood, like, what did I do? Like, really until just a few years ago, like, what did I do? What happened around that time? But it was just the things like, I remember that was the first time I said, "Ooh, I don't like your cooking." And honest to God, I swear that was where I went all bad, and I became his enemy
Oh,
until I went off into college and, like, became an adult. I was, like, his enemy, and so it can be very confusing for a child. It can be
oh.
so because if you go from all good to all bad, you think you're the problem. You think you're the one who did something, right? And that's really imperative to understand the reality.
I was an A student, and I told my parents from the get-go, since I was able to think about these things, that I wanted to be an English teacher. And I continued to do good in school. I went to a college prep school, and senior year, literally on class day, my father sat me down. He gave me a watch for graduation present and said, "We're not sending you to college because you're a girl and you're only going to end up getting married anyway." And I was beyond stunned. And the next couple years, I kept trying to find an alternative, like go in the Peace Corps, join the military, anything to go on with my life, to further myself as an adult. And they blocked every single thing. A job promotion that would send me to California, which was Capitol Records. And my father was like, "I'll throw myself in front of the plane." And he was a little crazy when he got drunk, and I believed he'd do it. And so I was like a prisoner in my home. And guess what? What do you do in 1967, 1968, in that kind of a time frame for women was restricted? Anyway, I got married, and then they even tried to stop that. I had to run away from home to get married. I saw that as my only escape.
Oh, because you were living with them at the, okay. So
Yeah.
interesting. I have several podcast episodes just devoted to borderline. The first one, I think it's called What You Need to Know About Borderline Personality Disorder. But I actually break it down into 4 categories. These I didn't come up with. I got these from someone who wrote a great book on it. But the first category is waif, and the waif outsources her nurture needs to the kids. So, you see parents like some of my clients, their parents never learned English. They came to this country, which, if you were going to move at age 25 to a different country, would you, for the rest of your life, would you really want to depend on your children to translate for you for the rest of your life?
Absolutely
I
not.
learned Spanish in 3 months when I lived in Guatemala for a short period of time. Like, that's an easy language compared to like Chinese, of course, but it's not hard to do when you're immersed. But they want to depend. They actually feel kind of like a way of loved or nurtured when they're depending on others. So it could be their spouse, it could be their children, but they want to depend. So that's like a waif example. Some of them never learn to drive. Some of them refuse to cook for themselves, refuse to clean. They want others to do that for them because that dependence makes them feel important and loved. So that's the waif. Then there's the hermit, and you're describing more of a hermit waif situation or a hermit borderline situation where they literally don't want you to leave their house. So a hermit type of borderline is miserable, but they don't want to be alone in their misery. They want their adult children to live either with them or maybe right next door and be with them, even though, and at all costs, they will do that at all costs. So that's another example. And then the other 2 types of borderlines is the queen, and that's like the one like the Hollywood shows that with some of the famous Hollywood stars that are very narcissistic and very
Joan
obviously need
Collins.
all that.
Not Joan Collins.
Yeah,
The movie.
yeah, Joan
Can't think of it right now. But
Joan Crawford, right?
yes, Crawford. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So other Joan Collins probably is too. But yeah, so like all that they need the stage, they need the spotlight at all times. Um, and my mom was a queen, and that's confusing for a child because you see the parent light up and be super talkative and super like fun and enthusiastic and engaging when there's one other person there. And the minute that other person leaves, the parent's just like, and the child just intuitively, implicitly believes, I'm rejected. I'm being rejected. I'm not enough. I'm not important because my mom just, she just falls
Doesn't
asleep or
have
whatever,
nothing,
she's,
no, just others.
yeah.
Mhm.
So that's like a queen. And the queen can be a male too, even though
Yeah.
the word is queen. And then the last one's called the witch. And those are the parents that we read about on the news that kill their children or like physically are very violent. So But those are real, and it really helps to have that understanding. So it sounds like you had
I
some
had one
hermit.
and two. I had one and two, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
They wanted me to stay there and make money.
Mm.
And they
They
told
wanted to depend on you.
exactly. So they
Yes.
wanted, all four of us were to live at home and have jobs. I worked since I was 10 illegally, and give them the money. And that was their plan. And my two brothers, God bless them, they were the lucky ones because they joined the service. And they walked in, they waited till they were 18. They walked in and my parents couldn't do anything about it. I was naive. I was a girl. I was brought up to be timid. And anything I brought up, I felt like I needed their permission to do. So that held me back. And yeah, so I definitely see both of them. And the other thing I'll tell you is my mother always worked. She worked her whole life during the day, and my dad worked during the night.
Mm.
So there was a period between, like, say, 3 and 5 o'clock where there was no adult in the house. So I raised my siblings from 5 years old.
Mm.
Oh, and I did not go to kindergarten, by the way.
Oh, wow. Well,
And
I believe
that
that.
really
And so
upset me. That
that you didn't
upset,
go to kindergarten, you mean?
that upset me more than the orphanage, I think.
That
Yes,
you were responsible for raising your siblings?
yes. 5, 4, and then the newborn. And then my sister came 10 years later. So I really feel like I was her mother. Because my mother was still working, father's still working days and nights.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you were.
Oh,
So that probably created codependency in you. So I would say I have found that children of borderlines are either codependent or they become borderlines themselves.
I'm codependent.
Yeah.
I know I am.
And
Oh,
then so codependents um learn to nurture others, and they find I have another episode that's all about codependency. It's called Unrooting Codependency is the name of the podcast episode. They find as children intuitively, again, implicitly, that their only nurture they derive is by nurturing others. And it's usually starting with the parent. They find some warmth, some nurture. It's not ideal at all, but they find a little bit of warmth and nurture from attuning to the parent. Oh, mommy, you're mad. Can I help you? And mommy's like, yeah. Mommy wants her daughter to nurture her to be her mommy. So she's playing little mommy first to the parent and then usually to the siblings. But it gives them a feeling of importance, of feeling seen. And kids need that. They absolutely all need that.
yeah.
So they feel seen, they feel important, and it feels good. It's not ideal, but it creates like this lifelong pattern in that child who's now an adult where she doesn't know who she is. She has no idea what feelings she has, especially the anger feelings. She has no idea what she feels, but she is highly attuned and really good at noticing when anyone else might be angry or upset and like
Mhm.
nurturing them and attuning to them and managing their feelings. So she has learned I'm responsible for your feelings, for everyone's feelings, but she's never learned to be responsible for her own feeling.
Yes, and at 75 years old, I am still dealing with that kind of thing. I'm in therapy, which actually came about because of 2020. Because I have an autoimmune disease and my husband has Parkinson's, and we chose not to leave the house for the
Yeah.
year.
Wow.
And this is how I got back into therapy. And she's the one that told me to write the book, which was very
Mm.
good advice. And
Yeah.
my parents, everything you're saying just fits perfectly. And my dad, when he was sober, he was a very good father. He taught me household chores and things like a mother would, because my mother wasn't there. She was at work. And he was nice and everything. And then when he got drunk, he would sit
Mm.
me down at the kitchen table and talk for hours and hours and hours. And I'd sit there. And after a certain limit, I was probably, this is when I was a teenager, when you start rolling your eyes. Okay. And my face is very expressive. And I wouldn't say anything, but he'd look at me and he'd say, if your eyes could kill, I'd be dead. Because I was like, I'm listening to you for 4 hours talk about
Oh
your
my
horrible child.
God.
No. And my brothers, now they got physically beaten. And the odd thing is, my mother beat my the older brother. And I did not know that. I did not see that. I didn't know it until we were adults. And he's told, the book came out, and he told me, Mom used to take me in the cellar and tie me up and beat me with a hose. I said, what? What? I couldn't believe it. I was like in shock. So, yeah, we kind of grew up in a prison camp. I think. It's like,
Well, I mean, honestly, so that's interesting because your dad was using you to attune to him. He was using you to be his therapist, his confidant, and that's what a borderline will do.
yep,
But you got the best of it because that is
that's it.
way better for a kid to learn, like, oh, I can attune to others, I can nurture others, than to just get beaten. And so the kid who just gets beaten usually becomes the borderline himself or herself.
Well, I don't want to say he's a narcissist, but
Yeah.
he was told by my mother, my life would be so much better if you weren't born. So when he became an adult, I noticed throughout his life that he put himself first all the time, all the
But
time.
yeah, so narcissism, I don't see a distinction at all between narcissism and borderline because borderlines are narcissists and vice versa. So, yeah, that
I
makes
mean, I
sense.
love him. Don't get me, I love him, but I have seen him put himself first before his wife and different things. And
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, like he has a closet full of clothes because they never wanted to buy us clothes. But if his wife wants to buy a new dress, he gives her a hard time. So, I
yeah,
mean, it's pretty obvious, you know.
yeah.
But so, yes, and my sister is an addict. Um, and she's 65 years old and she's still an addict. She was interventions, rehab, everything. And the youngest, Matthew, son, he disowned the family about 20 years ago,
Mm,
just cut us all off.
mm,
And my brother Joe and I were hurt because it's like, well, what did we do to him? Now, I do not know what his experience was as a
mm,
child.
mm.
So, yeah, we all got affected in a certain way in our own ways,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
gave me a lot of
So,
material for my book.
yeah. So I think one of the most important ways, though, we parent ourselves, we relate to ourselves the way we were parented, and that sticks. And so our relationship with anger, so I say there's no such thing as an angry person. That's like saying I'm not a breathing person. Are you a breathing person? Then you're an angry person. We all have anger.
Oh,
What
yeah.
matters is our relationship to it. And we learned that relationship was conditioned in our early childhood. And so, so Mimi, you probably learned to just not feel the anger, to suppress it and pretend like it wasn't there, and then manage everyone else's anger, right? And so with your
Yep.
dad, making those threats, you're like, oh, I'm responsible for him. And so really how we heal is healing our relationship with our anger. And that is the first most important principle, is unlearning that we're responsible for other people's feelings. Because I tell my clients, you can believe you're responsible for other people's feelings, but it's actually not possible to be responsible for other people's feelings, and you will die trying. So when you feel responsible, when you feel compelled to manage other people's feelings, you are not being responsible for your own, because it's an either or. You cannot do both.
We have to do another episode because there's so much that you're touching on, but I'd like to go deeper on a lot of it. And one of the traits I have had for a long time is I only cry when I'm angry or frustrated. And what I mean by that is I could be watching the saddest movie in the world with my husband and he's crying. And I'm like, okay. But when something goes totally wrong and people are saying something that's not true and it's an
Yeah.
appointment and they're saying, no, you don't have an appointment. And I'm like, I know I have an appointment. And I get frustrated. Then I'm going to
Yeah.
cry. That's
Well,
the
see,
emotion.
that's how little Mimi learned it was safe to display her anger, and that was the only way she
To
learned it
cry.
was safe was by crying because her parents didn't, slap her across the room.
Exactly.
Mhm,
Exactly.
that's very
You're right.
common. That is very common.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah,
It's like, what's wrong with you? That was a sad movie. All right, we're gonna definitely run out of time. I can't believe it. But I would like to have you on again, if that's
sure. Yeah,
possible.
that'd be
So
fun.
much to talk about. I'd love to be on your podcast because I am going to send you a copy of my book. And if you read it, you can pick up a few topics out of that. All right. And
Yeah.
thank you again for coming on. This was really a great conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
And if listeners want to hear more about what we talked about, the borderline, the codependency, the anger, my podcast is called Angry at the Right Things, and it's found wherever you
I
subscribe
am
to your
going to put
podcast.
all of that in the show notes, okay? All your information. And thanks again for coming. And my people that are listening, my audience that's pretty faithful to this show, if you're struggling, remember you're not alone. You just heard our stories, a little bit about our stories. So reach out to someone and let this be the day you embark on a journey towards your own peace and your own fulfillment.
Yeah.
Thanks again for coming. Have a great day.
Thank you, Mimi.
There we go. 1 second.